writing analytical essays for 101B. This can apply to doing a comparison contrast on Rose for Emily, to taking an essay exam, to any sort of essay about a short story, or even by extension about poetry or other genres. So hey, aren't we lucky? Okay, well, this has got a few little tunes that I wrote, little snippets of tunes throughout that I thought I'd throw in for you. Okay, so we start with basics of do's and don'ts about doing this kind of writing, and it's really kind of a gaffe, you know, to use the story's title as your title. So you wouldn't write as your title the title of the story, and so you'd invent your own title. You'd be creative about that. And so you want to make sure you mention the author and title early in the essay, preferably in the first paragraph. And use present tense for paraphrasing plot for support as evidence to back your argument. So we'll expand on all of these shortly. So hey, stay tuned. More to come, and we'll expand on that and flesh that out. So this is a big item. You don't want to recycle plot as filler. So you don't want to tell any part of the story that does not relate to your point. Here's the assumption. The assumption is your reader, your hypothetical audience, has already read the story, but not as thoroughly as you've read the story. You've dug into it. You have extracted meanings that a casual reading would not have revealed. So you've thought about it much more. Your brain sweat is what is going to reward the reader. But I'm going to ask you not to tell parts of the story or retell it at all where it doesn't relate to your point that you're making, right? So, yep, that's me. The instructor frowns on plot which is not obviously connected to the case you're making for your point, right? So you want to quote sparingly and integrate quotes, right? And fully document secondary sources. So, you know, it doesn't have to be painful. This guy's got a major migraine. Poor guy. So it's not usually critical. So how can this take place? You've got what you bring to the story, your background, your interests, and you can actually even fill this little circle in. This is all that you bring. And you know, I read a lot of your psychology majors or sociology majors or history majors, and you have all these side interests. So you're bringing that to your understanding of the story. Little Venn diagram. And that represents a story. Let's say Rose for Emily. And what happens? We have this remarkable interface, this relationship, you and the story, and you have an insight about the story, your own epiphany about the story, something that came to you, maybe, probably, who knows, at midnight. And you said, well, oh my gosh, this is the insight I have about this story. And that's what you want to cling to and build on. Doing a little brainwashing here. So, here's an example of using that title and author early in the essay, preferably in the first paragraph. And essentially, you're actually framing your thesis based on that. So subtle ironies pervade Edith Wharton's short story, Roman Fever. And look how rich this is. You know, these terms these elements of short stories and these terms are not just random terms. They're wonderful insights to have into art, into literature. It could be film, but irony is one of the richest of those terms to really expand your aesthetic pleasure that you experience when you read, when you see the movie, when you have this animated discussion, you know, coming out of the theater about, wow, did you catch that irony in the third scene of the fourth act, or whatever it happened to be. These are all-purpose terms, and I'm really encouraging you to keep that in mind. Okay, so here are some possible ways of thinking about this. Controversy. So you're looking for something controversial. A debate. And here's an example. By the way, this idea that Homer Barron, because he, in the story, quote, prefers the company of men, that in that time period doesn't indicate homosexuality. So this is really sort of just a wild tangent I'm going off on here. It is riddled with flaws. It really doesn't hold up based on the time period. We're kind of looking back at the story through our lens if we try to claim that, I think. All right. Oh, this is just one of my favorite quotes. The only person who can bore you is you. Ha! It's not on anyone's capability. Theoretically. Okay. Now, you know what? You can fill these things in, and it actually can help you focus amazingly on a topic within a short story, because that's what you're doing. In a way, you're hyper-focusing on something in particular that you want to expand in your analysis. And you can fill in that however you like, but it actually works. Now, here's another fill-in. Now, I wouldn't put this in your essay word for word this way, but it's really pretty amazing because we all have our first reactions, but those are just, you know, our gut level reactions. But then after we reread and rethink, brain sweat, you usually come to a different conclusion. And that's usually something that really has merit. It's something that is really thought-provoking. Our first reaction, typically maybe not, because we haven't really thought about it that fully. So you've dug more deeply, and that's... So I did want to make this point about analysis. Sometimes a Wikipedia type of definition, stay away from Wikipedia as a source, by the way, is just to break apart. And that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for really isolating and focusing on something specific in reference to the story and expanding upon the meaning of that, delving more deeply into the meaning of that. And you know, it really hurts me to hear people think and talk about analysis as clinical dry, or just picking apart, just breaking into its components. I would like us to think about it from a very different point of view, as a creative type of approach to writing and thinking, and not one that is just clinical. So it's an incisive function of the mind, right? This is a form of brainwashing. We don't want to quote excessively, to have these huge long quotes from the story, you know, whether it's London's To Build a Fire or Faulkner's Rose for Emily or whatever it happens to be. We don't want these massive quotes. Don't use the story title as yours. You can use it as part of your title. And here we're trying to avoid selecting a topic that's already obvious. It's so obvious that it probably has little or no meaning. So we're digging for something that's not superficial and on the surface. It's not, of course, an excuse to go off on some sort of tangent, political or otherwise. But do the opposite of this column. Okay. Good principles of expository writing. Of course, I mean, your essay has those components. And really argue your point. This is something I'm going to stress repeatedly. Make and back your point. And if your point has exceptions to it, bring up those exceptions and address them. Either accept part of them, refute them, however you want to do it. But if you think about the Rogerian form of argument based on Carl Rogers' model, then you're talking about respecting opposition viewpoints and furthermore, being aware of possible objections and exceptions in your own argument. Now that is thinking, isn't it? I mean, that's a high level of thinking, and that's typically what I'm going to look for. We're not looking for a general interpretation of the whole story, and having is just, I don't want you to walk through like an exposition, walk through the story paragraph by paragraph. That has its purpose. Not what I'm looking for. I'd like for you to use your mind in a much more powerful and focused way to make your point about the story and back it throughout. So, lots of possibilities. Explosive possibilities. So now we're going to look at some of those. Here are some options. Social criticism. The lottery. We read that story a bit later, and if you haven't read it, I don't want to spoil it for you. I don't want to be the spoiler. But certainly it's like holding up a mirror to our culture in a very unflattering way, because we so often, simply to be accepted, go along with what the crowd is doing. So we don't want to make waves. We don't want to upset anyone. So despite our talk about being a fiercely independent people, oftentimes we behave otherwise, and that's part of the social criticism. Psychology. Oh, wow, isn't this fun? The Jungian archetypes. So you can dig into those, the initiation archetype in this case, in Faulkner's barn burning. Expand upon that. Here we go again. If I have to write about something, or if I have to do much of anything, I'm going to ask or try to find out how I can enjoy it and what's in it for me. And if I'm interested in psychology and I have that opportunity to bring that interest into what I'm doing in my lit class, why shouldn't I? So I'm bolstering what I'm interested in by interfacing that with my lit class. Very rich area is the elements of short stories. That's one of the reasons you really want to know these. So in this case, we're talking about setting being of prime importance in the story. Philosophy. And so there we wrangle with a major philosophical issue, the nature of good and evil. And when you read that story, I think you'll see what I mean about that. Okay, so there's another example. And you know what, this just goes on. We're just scratching the surface. Just be inventive, make the connections. It's an opportunity. Biographical criticism, in other words, you have to be a little careful about this because it has fallen on disfavor to read into this story all sorts of biographical assumptions about an author. But if they are apparent and they're made connections that are clear about the author's life and something portrayed in the story, then you're on solid ground, especially if, in this case, you do quote a knowledgeable literary critic. By the way, we want to worship them as if they were gurus. Your mind is every bit as powerful, if not more so. Secondary source would be any source other than the story. Do be careful. You don't want to plagiarize. Oh, that would be terrible. We turn our papers into turnitin.com, and guess what happens? If a bunch of the paper is lifted from another source, typically it lights up like a neon Christmas tree in all kinds of colors that indict the writer. So be careful. Just be careful. Be aware. Always use the parentheticals. Use MLA format, whether you're talking about a secondary source or the primary source, the story itself. Whenever you're quoting or even paraphrasing, be on the safe side. Use the parentheticals. Your own experience can come into play on this, and I don't want you to toss that out. It isn't an opportunity to get on the soapbox and, as I say, go off on a tangent, but you don't want to rule it out. Don't worry about text on reserve. All right, I give you student-written quotations. All right, so this is a big thing. I really like you to not just toss quotations in there, but put them in smoothly. Lead into them. We call these signal phrases in MLA. The MLA handbook has a great deal on this, and it will give you many, many options. But this is just chunking it in there. We don't want that. It doesn't even have a parenthetical. This one leads into the quote and sets it up. It helps establish whatever it is the student writer wants to establish about how that quote is being